A friend of mine and I co-founded a company called Studio Charter. And Studio Charter is essentially a Zoom room in a box or a video production company in a box. A video podcast you want to create, or a high quality marketing video you want to create, or even a movie or an interview or a YouTube a short or something like that requires a lot of hardware, a nice camera, lighting, microphones, speakers if somebody's talking to you, a screen that you can look at. And that is very, very expensive. Traditionally, you would either hire a production company to set all that stuff up, or you would kind of Frankenstein something together. You would buy cameras and HDMI cables and computers and all these other things, and you'd hook it all together. Well, the opportunity we think exists is to provide all of that as a service. You've effectively rent it from us. We come in and we set up the studio for you, which is a bunch of lights on the ceiling in front of you and behind you, computing equipment. So everything plugs into a Mac, a beefy Mac, video networking, switching, networking equipment. And then behind you is a Mandalorian style LCD or LED screen or a giant television, like an 80 to 100 inch TV.
Oh,
And your interface is a stream deck. You can
yeah.
press a button that says beach, and behind you, the beach comes in, and we have a little fan that can blow your hair a little
No
bit.
way.
Yeah, yeah. And the lighting all changes to match. And so we have pre built looks, we call them. And we also are using AI to generate looks that you could just say, a rainy day in London, and the AI and technology we built will show a video, like a loop behind you of 30 seconds or a minute or two, depending on what looks best. And then the lighting changes. And so the lightning flashes and the lights flash. And there's a bunch of technology work we had to do in order to actually make that happen, because that's not built into any of the AI models. They're happy to make a video, but then the analysis of it, there's a lightning crash here. There's 6 lights that have to adjust in color, temperature, and intensity and all of that. It records it, multiple takes you can play, pause, and then it uploads to our cloud environment. And then you can edit the video there using tools like Descript or Loom, or send it off to an editor. And now you've got a super high quality production ready film or movie or short or a YouTube interview or anything like that. And you just pay a low monthly fee. We just take care of everything. And we are working on stuff too where the time would actually change. So instead of saying it's like noon, you could have it be like, well, what is it right now if I'm doing your Zoom call? And I want to have it be like, I'm actually outside right now. And so we're working on that to say, well, what's the weather out right now? Interfacing with these different APIs to have it look like you're standing outside at 2 p.m, even though you're inside or in a whole different environment.
That's incredible. So
Mm-hmm.
basically, you can rent a holodeck from Matt, and
I, I like that. I didn't think about it like that, but yes, that is a really great way of saying it. It kind of is. Because of lighting and depth of field of cameras and other things, it does require a certain physical space. But it is essentially a holodeck. Like, you walk into it and there's lights and screens, and yeah, it kind of is a holodeck. We should make it respond to voice, and you could just say computer, you know, load whatever. That'd be pretty cool.
yeah, you can do that these days with AI and everything.
Exactly.
That's amazing. So, how big is your team right now?
It's myself and my co-founder. His name is Zach Phillips. He has a background in video production. He had a production company in Wilmington, Delaware for maybe 15, 20-ish years, as long as I've known him. And this was born out of his frustrations with producing video content for his customers, for his clients. And it takes days to set this up somewhere. So you have to run cables and do all of this. It costs a fortune, not only in hardware, but in just labor, because somebody's got to climb up there and put the lights in and then adjust them and get the meters. And then it interfered with the desires of the clients to have really high quality video content. And you're like, well, that's an extra zero on the price tag if you want this next thing. And that's not really necessarily based on any of the fundamental technology, but just based on how hard it is to set that up, tear it down for a 2-day video shoot somewhere, and it rains and you have to bring all the stuff in. Or you can have something like this where you press, I want to go to the Eiffel Tower, and it looks like you're there. I'm doing all the technology work of the software, the physical infrastructure, the networking infrastructure, the cloud infrastructure, and the business side, and he's on the product and sales side. And then we have a handful of contractors that we work with to help us collect some physical artifacts. You have books in your background there. So if you were in our environment, that could be a look. But what happens sometimes is a customer who has something like that might have a new book, or they might be interviewing somebody with a book. And how do you digitize that book and put it in there? So we would take that. We have some contractors that help us make a 3D model of this book, put it in there, and it looks just like you're there. And one of the things that we've been playing around with, I think we probably can't do this for legal reasons, but we've, for fun, as part of like demos, recreated famous sitcom environments. So you can be in Seinfeld, you can be sitting on the couch, right? Or you can be in the Friends apartment in New York City. And because it's a 3D semi AI rendered thing, we can build the set of Friends and we can say, make it rain or make it snow. And that's not a video we made and had to pre-record and render. We certainly had to build the 3D space because you can't have AI create that because it doesn't really know what the friend set is. You'll get all sorts of weird artifacts. We tried that and it's not great. But we can use AI to something like put a tree, somewhere where there wasn't one, and it'll plop a little tree and you can say, make the wind blow it. And the tree kind of moves in the background. It's really cool.
Wow, that's
So
amazing.
they help us with stuff like that, video editing, that kind of thing. So 2 of us full time, and then a handful of contractors and folks that help us out. We've been at this for 6 to 9 months. And before then, Zach has been noodling on this for a long time. So one of the challenges with this business, and maybe you've encountered this before where you've worked at a company and somebody said, this is so hard. Why are we doing this? And you're like, that's the opportunity, right? If it was easy, then our customers would just do it, right? The fact that this is really hard and none of this stuff works together is why there's a business opportunity. That's what we find as well, is that a lot of stuff is finicky. The technology is analog protocol from the 80s for lighting, and that's just how it is. And there's like lighting over IP, but it's not quite there yet. And dialing in the right hardware configuration and software configuration has been really challenging because a lot of the applications for this are assuming like a theatrical production or a video production where everything's on site and everybody's on site. Well, we're not. Our customers we have all over, from New York to Florida and points in between. We try to keep them on the East Coast. So it's, for now, as we're bootstrapping this to be able to get there without needing to fly to Europe. But over time, as we have bigger and bigger challenges, we'll need more help having more SKUs. Right now, we just have one SKU, one main configuration. You can swap out the LED wall for a TV or vice versa because TVs are so much cheaper. An 80-inch to 100-inch TV is like $1,000 or $2,000 because it doesn't have to be that great. It's just a blurred image. But the similar size LED wall as of today, still 20, 30, 40 grand. So we have like sub SKUs, but it's still the same basic configuration of how many lights, how many cameras, all the different screens. But over time, as our customers will ask for new things, we'll have to figure out new configurations, right? So how do you do a 2-person studio, like a podcast studio? Because one of our customers does that. And so we're continuing to iterate on that. And we will need more and more help. I can't write all the code myself, but we can't afford a programmer right now as we're bootstrapping it. We may do some fundraising this year based on our current customer growth. Like, I think we can sustain that and then start to hire some full-time employees. But that's the goal, is to be able to not have us both doing all of the work as bootstrap founders tend to do. Ideally, if it's not raising money, we've got enough revenue to be able to sustain hiring a few additional folks, especially on the software and looks end, to be able to say, yes, if we have AI generate the Eiffel Tower, it's good enough. But some things also don't have an AI generation. So one of our customers is a large health system, and they want it to be their actual hospital environment, right? So somebody's got to go there and take 3D scans of everything to generate those assets. I desperately want to be able to hire some help because I'm writing all the Rails code. I'm getting paged when customers' environments don't work. And, we need some help.
How do you decide what your first hire is going to be. Because I see a lot of founders that I work with, they're thinking like, oh, I hate sales, so I'm going to hire a salesperson. Or some people are like, oh, I need to be in the sales, and so I'm going to hire a developer. It's time to get my first person on board. How do I know who that is?
That's a really good question, and one that a lot of founders I see do it wrong, or in my view, tend to do it wrong. So I've founded a couple of companies. The largest one was Reactive Ops. That was a bootstrapped DevOps as a service company, then moved into Kubernetes software and services, and we sold that right before the pandemic, and it's now called Fairwinds. And I had other companies as well, and also have been CTO or technical co-founder of a number of startups. And because we didn't have Google money, or even I don't know, like a 20% company money at a lot of those places, it really boiled down to me as the CTO or the CEO going like, well, what is this? We have a need and I can't do it anymore. Either it's just too hard, it's too painful, it's too slow. How is hiring this person going to achieve? I always thought of our business goals, whatever that business goal is. So that might be, sales growth, almost always sales growth, right? Because sales cure all things. And so I would just try to think about like, okay, in order to, accelerate this, we need another customer service person because I can't handle all the tickets, I'm drowning in it. Or we need another programmer because we're getting too many feature requests and they're all great and they fit into the product, but I can't write that code anymore and also do the things I have to do as a CEO. So I think at the very, very earliest stage, the most important thing to do is to say, my time as a founder usually is unpaid at the very beginning. So it's both free and also really, really, really expensive. And so you want to be very careful with and very strategic about the first hire that you have. And for me, it has always come down to what are we going to be able to unlock by having this person? What revenue growth or product growth or what's our meaningful trajectory going to be inflected by this next person? And so that's who we should focus on because I can do everything. Like I'm a jack of all trades as a startup founder, you often are. And that's what makes, I think, a good startup founder in my book because you can't hire somebody to do everything. And so you need to be good at everything, so to speak. Maybe not the best. Like I'm not the best CTO. I'm not the best programmer. I'm not the best customer service person, but I can do all of those jobs. Okay, well enough to get us to the next stage. And then we can throw away all my code and have a real CTO come in and hire actual people that can write better code than me. But, we won't live that long. If we had to hire somebody to do all of these things, we wouldn't make it. And I think eventually, if you reach the point in your company's life cycle where you get to sit back and then say, what do I not like to do? That is a really great place to be. But I haven't found that was the first hires. That usually comes later where it's like, you know what? I really don't like doing, figuring out what our health plan is going to be. Like, I'm just going to outsource that to either a hire or a company, something like that. And in my experience, that's usually further on down the road, 10, 20-ish people where you can start to take stuff you don't like off of your plate as a founder. And that's the best part about being a founder in my book is to be able to say, what, I don't like, doing the dishes, so I'm going to hire somebody to do it. And that's the great part about being a founder is you get to build a company and a role for yourself that is exactly what you like doing and are good at, but you have to have a certain amount of success in my experience before you can actually do that. And where I've seen that fail is when people do that too soon. Because sometimes in that discomfort, in that stuff I don't like to do, there are opportunities, right? Whether it's a product opportunity or just a way to like do something differently. And if you just hire somebody who's like, oh, security is hard, I'm going to go hire a security expert, that's fine, but you might miss an opportunity to both learn and level up yourself as a founder, but also maybe there's an opportunity to be like, oh, like maybe there's a business idea here because what we're doing now isn't working, but like this is actually really hard part about what we're doing to achieve this thing. Maybe here's an opportunity. And at many companies we encountered those obstacles. And if you do it too soon, you don't know if maybe there's a there that might be worth pursuing versus just like getting rid of it.
My take from an engineering perspective is when you're building a product early on, kind of like you said, you're writing code, you're making a product, but you haven't really seen kind of the patterns and what are the hard parts of the system to code? What are the things I'm doing over and over again where oh man, I really wish there was an easier or faster way to do this because this is super error prone. And eventually that struggle will often be like, oh, okay, I can make some sort of code generator, or I can make a debugging tool,
Right.
or I can build some sort of automation in that'll basically make adding features to this product or capabilities much faster, much more reliable in the future, and that'll save me lots of time. And especially with a bootstrap startup where you're not necessarily able to hire someone who's super senior who might be able to identify that for you. If you're a technical founder, and this probably applies to like, oh, I'm a sales driven founder, right? Like you can have insights based on your sales background and how you go about doing that, that when you hire a junior salesperson, they're not going to be able to necessarily have that insight early on until they have that kind of experience or
Hmm.
background. I think Rob Walling says this a lot. Like, yeah, bootstrapping is painful, and you want to hire someone much sooner than you can,
Hmm.
and get like, I need to be rescued because you feel like you're just getting buried in the work. But it is kind of a creative opportunity, maybe is a way to say that. That like, oh, all this stuff's landing on me, and if I can figure out how to dig out of it faster, I can basically build a better company out of that.
Hmm.
And it sucks. I think it's a common belief, right, in the bootstrapper community, especially, is if you aren't a founder with lots of sales experience, that you counterintuitively should not hire a salesperson early on, and that you should kind of grind out the sales process for many reasons. And so that's kind of like often like people say, like, do not hire a salesperson early on because you're just going to kind of cut yourself off the knees, even though it's painful. You aren't going to learn what you need to learn as a CEO. Are there any like, roles that you kind of feel are the same way, or maybe you agree with the sales one?
Yeah, I definitely agree with the sales one because as a bootstrapped or fund raised a seed or series A or anything like that, there's so many opportunities to conduct micro experiments, and every single conversation you have with a potential customer is an opportunity to learn something new. And at some point, yes, you want to be able to build a machine where $1 goes in, you turn a crank, and $10 comes out. At the very beginning, you don't have that yet. We have like hypotheses, we have ideas, we think that like people want this, and the last thing you want to do is go start building it and spend 3 years building this thing only to find out that you were wrong. And so, as a founder, your greatest strength and maybe your greatest weakness is that you can change your mind and you can make a new direction of the business. And so that I think is critical for knowledge management, situational awareness, just being able to sit down with somebody and say, what are your biggest problems? The consultative sales approach with payroll management or expense reports or any, B2B, any B2B stuff. B2C is a little harder, but in a B2B context, being able to sit down in front of somebody who's a decision maker who has the problems and your knowledge, skills, and experience based on your background in a space helps you navigate that, because a junior salesperson who has no experience in CI systems is just going to be like, well, do you use one of the three languages that we support? Great. Let's buy it. Right. Like, it's like, no, no, no. There's a time when you need to have that system built, and great, like, let's do that. But at the very beginning, you just don't know enough. And the biggest opportunity you have is to be able to pivot, maybe not in a broad sense, but you might have in your mind as a founder, well, if I'm building the next GitHub, well, I know I need pull requests. I know I need blah, 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 blah. Well, how do you prioritize those things? How do you know where the gaps are in the current GitHub without sitting down with somebody and really pulling it out of them to say, like, oh, do I actually really need pull requests, or, do I need issue tracking in my MVP? I don't know. And you're not going to get that without being able to sit down and talk with somebody. And I think the magical superpower you have as a founder is you have founder in your title or CEO or whatever it is. And if you want to talk to those people. And so, yes, if you're selling to Google and it's some procurement manager, in an org of 6,000 people, they don't care who you are. And so, like, yes, if you have a machine that can go talk to them and negotiate all that stuff, figuring out like where the invoices go and like working with all these other systems, that's cool. Like, yes, there are a bunch of roles that you should have in your company that manage all of that stuff. But in the very earliest phases, you as the founder will have people talk to you that they would not talk to SDR 432 at your company, or they won't talk to, customer rep or whatever that is throughout the whole org. And so I think it is important for a founder to get all of those touch points for as long as you can. We've all heard the horror stories of, oh, the CEO needs to interview me and the company is 6,000 people and the CEO is busy and you don't get to talk to him for 3 weeks. And so like there does come a point in time in which it does not make sense for the CEO of a big giant company to, interview the intern. Although, maybe some of them, that'd be kind of cool for that intern. Like that'd be neat. But I do think that the vast majority of the roles in the early stages, the founder should be participating, because you also don't really know what you need, right? Everyone knows we need sales or customer service or support or programming, but like you don't really know what that means until you do it enough to be like, oh, all of our customers are communicating over Slack. And so we need to hire somebody who is conversant in Slack animated GIFs or something. I don't know, right? Like, there are things like that where those things will help reveal themselves to you after you have been doing it for a little while as a founder. And it really helps you narrow your focus, because when it comes time to hire that first person doing a thing, especially in this economy, which we've been saying this economy for a long time. So I don't know how long we're going to be in this economy. But in this economy, you're going to put out a job ad for anything, you're going to get 6,000 people responding within the first 30 minutes. And so how do you know what is the most important thing for them if you don't have a good sense of what the problem is? And so if you hire too soon, you end up having bad fits, not because the person's not great, but just because you don't know enough about the problem that you're trying to solve when you're hiring somebody if you hire too soon. And so I do think it's important for the founders to continue to keep their feet wet in those things. But at some point, it doesn't make sense for a founder to do a lot of stuff. But I have always found it valuable as a founder, even when Reactive Ops was at our largest and we had hundreds of customers. I would still, do sales calls. I wouldn't do all of them anymore, right? Where I was doing 100% of the sales calls, I might do like 1 or 2 a week, because A, I enjoy it, and B, it also helps me learn. Or if it's a really big deal we want to close, like great, bring me in. And because I'm in it, I'm not going to be a burden, because we've all seen that where the founder has been so far away from the business. And so we often see that in the technology piece, where they'll come in and they're like, I'm going to write some code this weekend. And you're like, no, please don't. We use a different language now. And they're like, what? Right? You want to either be in it from time to time, so you are in that ad, or like really give it up. And I think the example of that is, from a systems perspective, if you have like a hot standby, if you ever heard it, right? You have like multiple data centers. I have AWS and Google. Well, if you don't have some of your traffic going to Google 24/7, if AWS crashes, Google will probably not work. Not because of Google doing anything wrong, but just like if you don't exercise that muscle, or if the system isn't always on, when it comes time to actually turn it on, something will break, because you will have forgotten that, oh yeah, we forgot to renew the subdomain name that over here in the Google, and we didn't put that in there because we're not in it every day. And so I think it is helpful as a founder to recognize when you have some unique value add, and when it's helpful for you to just continue to maintain situational awareness, or when it's time for you to say, okay, like I'm finished with this.
I love what you said about micro experiments in your sales process, because I think that is so true, especially in the B2B sales, that until you're selling, you don't really, even if you're an expert in the field, like your GitHub example, right? You're like, oh, I use version control all the time. I know how all this stuff works. You don't know how a business buyer who is not going to be a software developer usually,
Mm-hmm.
how they think about this problem space, how they go about procuring software, what their expectations are of your software, what they think the value add of this type of software is. You have probably no idea as a founder, if you have a technical background, what all the stuff is. And so really early on, especially, I think the sales process is like a, maybe not experiment, like an investigation. You're like Sherlock Holmes trying to figure out, okay,
Mm-hmm.
what are the economic buyers really interested in when they're buying this sort of tool? What do they need? And of course, there is the user consideration as well. If you're making a developer tool, what developers care about, that does matter. But it matters more what the people who have control over paying invoices. That really matters what they care about. It matters what maybe there's an enterprise security team that you have to deal with. All these different things that you kind of learn over time. And until you understand that, you are not going to have a successful sales process. And it might turn out there's lots of commonality across different people you're selling to, which is awesome because, yeah, then maybe it is time that you can hire some more junior salespeople to come in and take over that process. Or it may turn out that you still don't know, like, oh, vendor B, okay, this is completely new experience. They want completely different
Hmm.
things. Okay, I don't know about this market enough yet to kind of replace myself in this sales process.
There's also, I think, something interesting too, where when you start to we all like to build systems, right? We like, we want to build a big company that like just works, and we know that artisanal sales processes don't scale, or artisanal software processes or whatever. Like we know, don't repeat yourself, and all these other sort of aphorisms that we say about systems building. But you can hit premature optimization pretty quickly in this business. And oftentimes, when you'll talk to a customer, potential customer, in any context, but usually in a sales context, they'll give you a list of 1,000 things that they want. And without being able to stare them in the eyes and have the experience of knowing, you're like, do you really need this? Tell me more, right? Like what is driving this? Because obviously a customer will they fall in love with a potential solution to the problem, and your job as the founder is to fall in love with the problem, not the solution. And so they'll come to you with solutions, and you need to back up and say, wait a second, is this the problem that we're trying to solve here in some unique way? And a more junior person, or somebody who might not even feel like they have the authority, even if they're a more senior person, might be like, well, they said they need these 10 things. And I said, okay, right? Versus, well, do they really need these 10, or is it just these five that are the core, and these other five we can push off? And I know that because of my experience in this space, but also just my interpersonal communications with them by looking at them and understanding their body language. And I'm like, do you really need, you know, GitHub running, on your car so you can do merges, from your screen? Like, you said you want that, but like, tell me more. Like, oh, I heard it, on some like podcast, and I thought it'd be cool, right? That happens all the time in these earlier stages. You're going to get a wish list from people, which is great. But a more senior person, or you as the founder, are going to be able to really cut through that and find out what are the nice to haves and what are the must haves. And I think that that is a really useful skill for a founder to have, because otherwise you're going to be confronted with like, well, I have maybe some analysis paralysis of there's 6,000 things they want, and I know I can't deliver that. So like, guess I'm not going to close the deal. Or it's like, what is really most important? Help me prioritize my internal, task queue based on my conversations, and really cut through and say like, do you need this? Or what if we gave it to you in 6 to 12 months? Or 24 or whatever, and make no promises. But in my experience, a lot of the time, people just forget all about it, or something new changes where this thing that they wanted 6 months ago is now no longer relevant because you've solved it a different way.
The people you hire, they might have come from a bigger organization where they've actually been trained to not
Mm-hmm.
pay attention to this stuff. And this isn't just sales, it can be
Mm-hmm.
engineering too,
Yep.
right? People go work in a large company and they're basically trained, okay, the product manager will write this ticket and
Ticket
you will
comes in.
do what the ticket says,
Yep.
and you will check that in and you'll deploy to production, and you better have everything in that ticket all done exactly as it says. And in a startup and sales or in engineering, that can be a disaster because you are going to be this bootstrap CEO who sleeps 2 hours a day, and you're going to like jot off, we need to have this feature so that we can apply these cool filters to people's profile photographs or whatever. And here's how you do it. And here's some like pseudocode. Go do that. Okay. The person, it looks like it makes every single photo just a black rectangle. Well, okay. Anyhow, and they check it in and send it to production, and you're
Mm-hmm.
like, why you did you not see that it just deletes every single profile photo? And
Mm-hmm.
like, yeah, but that's what was in the ticket,
That's
so
what we
that's
said.
that's what I did. And it's like, no. Right. And so I think you can't just hire someone who looks like they're awesome and throw them in there without kind of understanding their background, how they think through these problems, and how exposed they are to this kind of entrepreneurial environment where they're allowed to, in a sales conversation, push back on the potential customer, or maybe they've learned something from the customer and come back to you and say, hey, this customer asked for this. Previous customers have also asked for this. It seems like a pattern. Do you think maybe we should add this functionality or this feature set so we can get these customers? Whereas in a big company, that salesperson might just be like, well, they're just not a good fit. Next person.
Every time somebody talks to a customer or somebody else, and then talks to somebody else and creates an artifact or a ticket or a design document or whatever, that is by its very nature a game of telephone. It's a lossy process. You lose the context that was involved in determining we should do X, Y, or Z, and here's how we should do it. And my experience, and I've never worked as a VP at Google or a C-level at these big giant companies. And so like, okay, fine. I don't know what happens at a 100,000 person company. Maybe you have to operate in such a way where like the person at the leaf node of the tree gets a ticket in some system and they do exactly that and they don't know what's happening or like how it fits into the bigger picture. It's just like make the button blue and you change the color of the button to blue and then you go to the next one. Like maybe that is how that has to be run. I don't know. It seems like an environment I would not thrive in and an environment I would not prefer to work in. And I'm not, besides the Google piece, I'm not claiming Google does anything like that, but I'm just saying it, big giant companies, like you tend to hear those things. And what has always been valuable for me in an engineering context, in a customer or a product, or throughout the entire company, is really deeply understanding and empathizing with our customers and their problems. Because what's interesting is that as like a product manager or somebody who's maybe on the product or sales side, you might think of like, okay, if we're, again, to use the GitHub example, you need to be able to pull request, you need to be able to comment on it, and there's all this other stuff that go into your product requirements document. And as an engineer, though, like there's a million micro decisions you make that can't be documented by a PM because it's code effectively, right? Like if somebody were to write out that when you push this button, these three methods are called, well, then that's code, right? Like, and so as an engineer, you're confronted with, sure, I need to open a pull request, but like there are so many micro decisions involved, or maybe some even on the macro that can't be documented just from talking to the customer that are like, well, what happens when you close them? Like, do you delete the branch or not? Right. And some PM and like, you don't know, but you as a developer, if you can access the customer or if you're the customer too, that makes it even better. You're going to say, well, what would I do? Or, like, how do we handle branches? Well, like we just delete them because like if you close the pull request and you've merged it, like what are you going to keep the branch around for? Right. Like, and maybe we'll archive it because I know we have an archival system and I know this team is working on that. And so I do think that you end up with better software, better products, better companies, the more context that is shared directly with everyone doing the work. That has been a constant refrain from the very first job I had in college, where I was a software developer for the university. So I got my undergraduate in computer science, and then I worked for the university. And I worked for university advancement, the people that call you up. I don't know if you have had this experience, but they call up people asking for money. And so the development officers, the people who are the sales folks for the university, would say, I'm going to some city and I need a report of everybody there that's blah, blah, blah. And even I knew as a 22-year-old kid or whatever that it would go to somebody and then go to somebody and then go to my boss. And then I would get a ticket that would say like, write a report that pulls people that blah, blah, blah. And I knew that was never, like if I just sat down and did that and I produced that report, 199% of the time, maybe not 100, but 99% of the time, it would go back to that person. They would say, that's not really what I need. Like, no, that's not what I meant. And so whenever I would get that, I would just go over there and I would sit down with them. I would build a little prototype very quickly in Excel or something, and sit down with them and say, like, this is kind of what I'm thinking based on my interaction with you before, knowing the data, because we had a database of all the alums and all this other stuff and external data I would pull in. And I would say, is this kind of like what you're looking for? And I said, one thing that's interesting is that like you're going to New York to talk to those people. Like, there's a Yankees game or something. Did you know that? Right. Because like I was pulling in some data feeds, of like what's happening there. And they're like, oh yeah, we could go do that. And I could take the donors out to do that. And that's a thing that would never have happened if I just sat down and I read the ticket and produced what the ticket said. But by being able to sit down with my customer and deeply understand it, we were able to build something maybe different, or something that even added more value, because I was like, oh, it's really easy for me to get the weather, and it's going to rain, so maybe you want to go move indoors, right? Your event should be somewhere else now. But they're non-technical people often, and so they don't know, right? They're not sure like what is possible or not possible. Sometimes what we do now with Gen AI, things are getting a little less magic, but still at the end of the day, a non-technical person doesn't know what is possible, or whether it's easy or hard to get the weather in some zip code and in an API. And so I found that that is super helpful. In high school and college, I interned at software companies when other people were maybe had the summers off. I was programming. I remember my first programming gig was QA. So it wasn't like really programming, but I wrote some code to like automated test scripts. And it was for construction ready mix software company. So, the big drum trucks that spin a ready mix where the concrete comes out. Our software managed the entire plant, everything from how the concrete is made, and called a mix design, like a cake, and there were scientists who would look at the weather and humidity and elevation and all these other things. And because concrete is a scientific process, right? It's a chemical reaction that occurs to turn this liquid into a solid that hopefully does not cause the bridge to fall over in 3 days, and to meet all of your requirements for compression and whatever, and what kind of rebar do you need, and add mix and aggregate, all this other kind of stuff. So I was doing QA, and I remember I was not a very good QA person. I would like hold down the button and it would like crash, because you would put like $1, or you would put like text in a number field, and it would like crash the app. This was like a Windows app back before there was websites. And my boss sat me down. He's like, this is not something that matters, because this is not what our users do. And he's like, let's go to a concrete plant. So we went, and it was really interesting, because you often see in both aircraft design or any industrial design of software, things where planes have crashed. And I've given some talks on this, because the error message was in the wrong font color, because nobody specified what the font color should be. And so the programmer's just like, all right, white. You're like, well, this means the wheels are going to come off, right? Like, no, this should be like bright and flashing, but just like the systems are too complex for any one person to put that in. Any product manager, anyone who's making a specification, the systems are so complex that they cannot be the keeper of all the knowledge. And so it's got to be distributed. And so one of the other stories I like to say about that is, in addition to going there and seeing how loud it was, everybody's wearing big earmuffs, because they're taking big rocks and crushing them into smaller rocks. And as you imagine, that's like quite loud. And conveyor belts and, stuff will rip your arms off. And so you have to be very careful where you walk. And it was very helpful to see my software, because eventually I wrote some software for the utilities, not the stuff that actually made the concrete, but like back in the olden days, before we had the internet, we had modems, and it would call up. And so the mix designer might not be on site, or the mix designer might be in a different facility. And if you have many plants, they would type up the mix design, and my software would call up all of the different places and push and pull like different mix designs and things. But it was really neat to see like, well, how are they using this? Because I just don't know until I'm there. And I had for the longest time, and I wish I could find it, a picture of one of our prototypical customers using the software with a picture on it that the title was like, remember your target customer. Because it was like, this is who's using our software, wearing the hard hat with the earmuffs, in the high vis, in a dusty environment. Like, that's how they're using this, pushing a button or like typing on, a CRT, like in the Fallout game or something. And I always thought that was super helpful. And I bring that with me to every job I've ever been at, every company I've ever been at. I like to instill that sort of ethos of radical empathy, so to speak, with our customers through direct experience as best we can. And to take it back to the point of what should the CEO still do? I think the CEO should still handle customer service tickets from time to time, even at a 150 company or 1,000-person company. It helps you remember that empathy, and it also delights the customer when they're talking to the CEO. Like, that's cool. And it's like free, it's free to do. I mean, again, it's not, because your time as a CEO is infinitely expensive, but at the same time, I think it's totally worth it.
I 100% agree that like the context of how your product is used is incredibly valuable for everybody in the company to know, right? A lot of leaders, like startup leaders who might be fairly new to the leadership gig, kind of they feel like, "Oh, I already told everybody about this context thing. I told people about the
Uh-huh.
vision and all the stuff. I already said that once." So, they all know that. And no, that
No.
is not the way that stuff works at all. The people need to be constantly reminded about, like, what's the vision of the company? What do our customers actually do on a day-to-day basis with our product? And it's not like we're not in the business of, we technically fulfilled the mission of our software. No, we're in the business of like doing what we do for our customers, right? It's not about like, well, that feature is there. You just need to go through 37
You don't know
different
how to get to
menus
it. Yeah.
and type in the special code. No, that's not what we're after here. We're trying to make things happen. I work a lot helping out companies that have complex products, right? Like a mix of hardware and software or hardware that interacts with different things, right? And it is so frustrating to me that people they're resistant, even in smaller startups, they're resistant to just asking the customer, hey, when you had this problem with this thing, tell us a story about what was happening, what did you see, like what was going on at the time, like what did the hardware look like? How are you holding the hardware? How did that happen? And people can just be like, well, that doesn't really matter. Yeah, it does actually matter because there could be something, some small cheap thing we can do to make that better. Even if it's just like, oh, we just flash a little diagram, like this is how you hold the doodad, right? Or something like that. And that helps people be more successful. And it doesn't have to be a huge intervention, but if you don't understand that, you have no opportunities to figure out these weird things. When I was at Evernote, we used this user testing service, and we have this video that we passed around internally forever where we gave instructions to these user testing people, like do this with our product and then do this. And it's just step-by-step instructions. And the hilarious thing is we told people to use their iPhone to take a photo of the chair they're sitting in, but the wording was just not ideal. And this person was looking in our app for a chair. And the whole testing video was like, I think I've been on every screen. I don't see a chair. And we're just like, oh my gosh, user experience is so hard. And we can't
Hmm.
even write a freaking, like, occasionally we mess up on the instructions for user testing. So they can't even get into the actual testing of the product we're building here. And it's just, it's so funny. And that is kind of what happens at every startup, right? Is that
Hmm.
you think you've done like, our product, it rocks. And then, you hand it off the customer and they're just kind of confused or lost. They don't know where to start. And you need to get in there. And my last thing is that you were mentioning you wish you still had the photo of the end
Hmm.
user, right? If you're in a bootstrap startup or any startup, take lots of photos because man, you're gonna regret not having more photos of your team and
Mm.
stuff like implementations. Take lots of photos because when I think back to the cool startups I've worked at, I was like, man, I wish I had more photos of me and my coworkers just working on stuff, even if it's just candid shots and stuff, because we had some fun times.
That's a really interesting point. So I worked at one company that was a startup that had graduated out of startup, thankfully, and was, I think, celebrating their 10th birthday when I joined or somewhere around there. And the CEO wanted to show the product from 10 years ago. Like the CEO and CTO had like co-founded and built this from scratch. And so, it was all in GitHub, but the code wouldn't build anymore, right? It was like, so it was like a tremendous amount of work to go back in time and say, like, what did the product look on day one? And then what did it look a year later, et cetera. So in addition to just like normal or day-to-day business stuff, which is, I think of all the places I've worked at, we've done retreats that were really fun. There's no artifacts of that, no pictures, just my memories, which are fading as I get older. But also, like, how did the product look a year ago? Like, what features did we have? What did we think was cool that isn't? And just to think about the evolution of the product, and the customer interactions, and that's all over the place. What did the sales deck look like? What were we selling a year ago, 5 years ago? What was resonating with people? How have we evolved over that? It's not just a fun trip down memory lane, which, okay, fine, like there's some value in that, but it really helps you understand the evolution of the product, because as new people come on board, to your point about, you just tell people once what goes on, like, no, 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 no. What is that old adage? Like, tell them what you're going to say, tell them what you tell them, and then tell them what you told them. Like, just always, always, always repeat everything all the time. At Reactive Ops, we had a weekly all hands where even at, 40, 50 people or whatever it was, we would still sit down and say like, okay, here's what we did last week. Here's what we're going to do this week. Here's our bigger goals. Like, here's what we're doing. Here's what we're focused on. Everybody get that? Like, let's talk about it. If not, because it's really easy as a founder or a executive, once you get past the very small stage, you are thinking about like, yeah, we're going to, build jet skis to Mars. And that's really cool. But like, somebody fixing the test suite or whatever is focused on their job, and they're going to forget, not because they're bad or anything. It's just like, well, I can't keep in my head the thousand things that the company is doing and then also what I have to do. Like, it's too much context switching and too much zooming in and out. No one is really capable of doing that with any efficacy. And so you do really have to over communicate those things in high bandwidth ways, right? It's not like, oh, well, we have a deck somewhere, like go find it. Like, I mean, sure, but at the same time, that's just not how humans, we like to look at other people and talk with them. And I think it's really valuable to keep communicating with our employees, our colleagues, our customers as often as we can. I don't think you can, I mean, you can think of silly ways to overdo that, but I really find it challenging to overdo those kinds of things. And I find that every time we invest in communication internally, and that doesn't necessarily mean a new system. I think where I have seen too many startups have challenges or where they prematurely systematize something, it's not just the stuff you don't know, but there's a reason why every piece of enterprise software sucks. And that's not because the programmers suck or the product managers suck. It's that companies get big enough that they say, this is our process, make software that just codifies our process or we won't pay it. So that's why you go into every travel app or every bank reimbursement app and you're like, why does it take 35 clicks to reimburse this person? Well, because our company has like 13 different steps that we need to approve a $30 a month GitHub charge. And that's how big companies operate. And there's like, yeah, if you want $1 million, you're going to make your software do everything that ours does because we don't want to change anything. And I think that's one of the many reasons why startups often outcompete enterprises is that like, yeah, I can just put the GitHub charge on my credit card. We don't have to build all this crazy software. And I liken this to, I am a dabbling musician. I, played back in the olden days, but, a jazz ensemble to an orchestra, right? And every point along that continuum of, even as a jazz ensemble, there is some music we're playing. It's a small group, but we have a lot of improvisation. We have a lot of experimentation, and yeah, I'm going to flub a note here or there, but like that's part of it, is that not every experience of us playing for an audience is going to go exactly the same or be great. But like that's part of the system design that we have, is it's got that built in. And then as companies go along, they want to move towards an orchestra where there's 1,000 people doing all the same thing, and you have music, and it's all a factory. And I think what ends up occurring is that startups try to like jump to that phase too soon. And I don't know if you've ever had this experience where it's like, well, I need to forecast sales, right? Like where are things going to be a year from now? Well, there are startups that do that. They'll reach into your bank account, they'll reach into your Stripe, they'll reach into your ticketing system or like whatever it is. And you're clicking buttons in this system and you spend hours and hours and hours and hours and hours trying to like get a graph that does this. And you're like, yay. And you're like, that's a Google Sheet that you could have done in 5 minutes and moved on, right? Because like the amount of certainty that you have at the very early stage is very low. And so you want to have a system that can change very quickly. And that's why spreadsheets continue to exist and power most of the world, is that you can just type in a number or you can make a date that looks like a number and screw everything up. But, it's just there. It's not like a web form that gives you an error. And then you're like, okay, well, how do in order to do this, I have to enter a customer into the customers tab. So I type in all their information. Oh, it requires their address. What is the address of the customer? Let me look it up. Oh, I have to put the zip in. You're like, where's the zip? So you do all of that. And you're like, how much are they charging? Oh yeah, like $600 a month. And you put that in there. And like, do you think I can make them $1,200? Okay, cool. And you spent hours and hours making a fake chart that in 3 days is going to be irrelevant, versus like just type some numbers into Excel, like get a swag and be like, are we out of business or are we probably not? And, that's probably all the specificity you need or the certainty that you need at the very earliest stages. And my one last soapbox thing that I will say and then get off of it is I think that's another reason why big companies tend to fail is they require way too much certainty to do anything. They're so risk averse that they're like, what's on our Q2 roadmap 4 years from now? Like, what? I don't know. Right? Like, the whole world will be so different 6 months from now, let alone 3 years from now. How am I supposed to have a roadmap that goes that far out? It is valuable to think about big buckets of now, then, later, never. But I don't think it's valuable to go have some senior director tell some VP so that the VP can tell the C level, that the C level can sit in the board and say, this is the feature we're going to ship in 3.5 years. That has never been valuable. I've been on boards, I've been a CEO. I have never found that valuable and just a waste of everybody's time. But like big companies do it all the time. Maybe it's the publicly traded concept of it, or it's just the fact that there are all these external stakeholders now. But I find that companies, just people, want to move to certainty where it doesn't exist, and that hamstrings them. And as a early stage startup founder, whether or not you're bootstrapping or you've raised money, resist that urge unless you really have to. Again, back to hiring, like unless you really, 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 really have to, don't put a system in place where you don't need one. Like, okay, cool, we'll have a ticketing system and we'll have SLAs, and like a customer's thing comes in and like within 5 minutes it's got to do this and it's got to do that, and you spend most of your time in the tool versus what you should be spending your time, which is talking to customers. So anyway, rant over.
Talking to customers is always an important activity, I think, for every business. And I think the bigger you get, the more big companies develop an immune system around
Mm-hmm.
actually getting high level people talking to
Right.
customers, especially new customers, right? That might have like these existing great relationships or whatever. But I don't know, what's the average lifespan of a publicly traded company? It's like 10, 15 years, something like that. These new customers, some of them are going to be your future customers, right? Some of your big guys are going to evaporate or
Mm-hmm.
leave, or they go out of business or get acquired or whatever. So anyhow, you need to talk to your customers. And I think it also points to like maybe the value of being an early stage startup is the opposite of systems. It's in that you have some room for serendipity. Like you have
Mm-hmm.
an engineer working on something like in the spare time, like, I have this idea. What if we built this little widget, this little calculator in the screen? Maybe the customers would like that. And they show it to the CEO or a colleague or whatever, and they show it to a customer. The customer's like, oh, that's amazing. I didn't know you could do that. And then, wow, okay, great. You just made a new feature that's going to sell your product, right?
Mm-hmm.
But in a big company, when you have too many systems, too much overhead, and like you were talking about earlier, you don't have this context. Everybody's not aware of the context of your business. Who are the stakeholders? What do they do? What are they interested in? If they don't know that, they can't make a killer feature. And if you have too much systems, they're not going to have time, right? Because they're going to look like they're unproductive if they're spending time on experimenting with some new concept or idea that might be an amazing innovation for your
Mm-hmm.
company.
I went back to school to get my MBA because I was like, okay, like I know I'm not the world's greatest programmer, and so like I need to understand how businesses work. And MBA schools, I didn't go to top 2 or 3 MBA school, but it was a fine one, and it was all about like how do we build more factories in a factory? It's like factories, right? Our business is not in building widgets; it's in building a system that builds the thing that builds the widgets, right? Like that's kind of like what executive talk and MBAs are all about. How do we sit down and in a spreadsheet decide if we want to build a new factory or something? And that's valuable and makes a certain amount of sense. But like in my experience, especially in technology, whether it's now AI, but like the rate of change, like the first derivative of change is increasing, where like things are changing so much more rapidly than they ever have in the past, that like that kind of thinking of like just sitting down and trying to like pencil something out with a high degree of specificity has never really sat well with me. But I understand why. If you're making soap or something, you need to figure out like, okay, how do we wring out every last bit, in a lean process, every bit of waste and error. And it makes a ton of sense to me when you're building soap. Like if you're 2% less efficient, it costs you a bunch of, added stuff. Or, at Facebook or Google scale, if your code leaks a little bit of memory, now you have to buy 3 more data centers. Like makes a ton of sense. I get that, at scale, you need to do those things. But, the counter to that is these big companies can build big software, but at the same time, there's diseconomies of scale in software that don't exist in factories where like you need economies of scale. Actually, in software, you don't get economies of scale. You hire 10 more programmers and your software gets slower. It takes more time to ship a feature. We intuitively know this. We're like, we know like, yes, if we hire 10,000 programmers, nothing will get done. Versus like, well, if you had 10,000 more machines, we'll produce a lot more widgets. Yes, of course, right? Like we all understand that that works, but in software, the smaller we are, obviously if there's just one person, but now with AI and other stuff, like maybe, but our strength is not in being able to produce a new operating system. Yes, there's just requires tons and tons of human input. What we have as our superpower as a small company, as a small startup, is not only just the human touch, but the ability to move fast and say, like, you talk with somebody and they're like, I really wish the button was blue. Whatever. I don't know. Make that up. And you're like, all right, boop. And you're like, refresh your browser. Or actually with, with JavaScript or whatever, it just shows up and your button's blue now. And that's like mind blown for these people because they're used to interacting with things in the real world where, even with 2 or 3 day Amazon shipping, it still takes a while. But, being able to be super responsive to their needs, because oftentimes, as you said, like it's not a giant thing. Somebody's not going to say, what I really need? I need a whole new workflow for my invoicing system. You're like, no, I just want to be able to send like a reminder email with a click of a button. You're like, oh, that's like one line of code. 1 second. And you can just be like, great, there it is. Like, is that what you want? Is that what you meant? And like, that is such a superpower you have as a small company that big companies can just never do for all of the reasons that we've been discussing. And when I see small companies trying to behave like big companies, I'm like, oh, no, stop, right? Like, there's a reason why, at Amazon and Google scale, everything's a microservice or a Lambda or something. But as a single person startup, a monolith is really nice because it's all in one place. And you get there in which you have to create services and microservices and decompose things. But like, don't start there. I remember talking to a startup when I was running reactive ops that had 3 people. And I was talking about their app. They weren't going to be a customer of ours for that reason. They were just too small. But I said, okay, your application stack and Node and all this stuff. And I was like, oh, cool. What's your head count? Like, oh, we have like 4 people, 3 programmers and 1 DevOps person. And I was like, what? I don't know. The audience of this podcast, that just is like mind blown. It would be saying like, we're a 3-person street hockey team. We have our own doctor, right? You're like, what? Like, what do you, what? Like, that doesn't make any sense. Like, huh? And because, oh, well, because this was the early stages of Lambda, AWS Lambda, but this is still sort of the case even today as we speak, is that they were like, well, deploying is really hard. And so we hired somebody to just manage the Lambda tool chain and like, click buttons in AWS and run, CloudFormation and stuff. And I was like, that is bonkers. You should not be doing that. Take that money and rewrite the app in a monolithic Node app, ship it to Heroku or digital, like anywhere, some platform as a service, and move on with life. Like, you will get there or you won't. But like, this is not the biggest problem for you to be focusing on. And they did eventually go out of business. I can't say that was because they were on Lambda at the very beginning when they should have been on the monolith, but I don't think that helped. I think that hindered their process more than helped them.
I could rant about this for a lot, but when you're building your tech stack at a startup company, build it for like, hey, this is a really easy tech stack to use, and I can hire lots of developers cheaply, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do not build your startup around this hot, amazing stuff that like kind of doesn't work.
There's no documentation.
You're going to have to hire like the hottest developers and compete with like some VC funded, right? You're operating in hard mode. Yeah. Pick Rails or Django. Like, I don't care, whatever. Pick
something that
like
ChatGPT and Gemini and everything have slurped up all of the history of the internet in. And you can ask them, how do I do X in Rails? And it knows that because Rails is old, right? I've been doing Rails since 2005. The app we're working on now is a Rails 8 app. And I'm doing that because like, is it the best for what we're doing? No, but it's not worth my time or anybody's time to like learn some new front end framework that is really whiz bang. That if I go to ChatGPT and I'm like, why am I getting this build error for some Node package? And they're like, I don't even know what that package is. I'm like, that's not helpful for me today. What is helpful is for me to like get through this problem as quickly as I can. Since I've been doing Rails since 2005, I know what bundler is and I know how to like resolve all these things. But at the same time, I can just, paste a little snippet into any of these AIs and like, oh, I've seen this 10,000 times. And I know exactly the answer. Like, that's what you need to move fast.
Yes, it's freaking amazing that like You can take an error string, just that, no other
Hmm.
context, paste it into like ChatGPT, and you're like, "Oh, this is a Rails 8 app, and you're obviously having this problem, and you need to do this." And it's like, that is
It
like I
works.
just pasted in 123 characters, and
And you
part of that
solved
was
it.
a date stamp, and you figured out what the heck's happening in my stack. That's so cool.
One of the sayings we had at one of my company's Rails machine I was at was, we Google better than you, which is that experience of saying, like, you see this MySQL error message. And if you just Google it, you don't have the right context or you don't have the right frequency, because Google just sees a string, right? It doesn't really know what is behind that. But we as ops people know that, oh, this is like a replication problem, because I know we're using this Galera cluster, and I'm pretty sure that's what that is. So I'm going to type in some of this message and I'm going to put some more stuff at the end. And it's not that we're smarter, it's just that we have that experience. But now the GPTs of the world have it slurped in enough that even if you don't provide that, they're going to say it's probably this, or they'll even prompt you and say, are you using clustering stuff? Because you might also see these kinds of things. And that's really leveled up, I think, all of our product development stuff. If folks are not using Gen AI, like they absolutely should be, like yesterday, because it has enabled me as a solo programmer to write so much more stuff faster, which has always bothered me as a one of the reasons why I don't like programming. Is it's like, well, CSS and HTML is just not my forte in general. I would be like, I want to center a box. And you're like, that's impossible. And I was like, what? You, wait, you can't center a box in HTML? Like, no, centering is just not a thing a browser can do. And I was
True
like, this is
story.
crazy pants. But now, like, there's Tailwind CSS, there's all these frameworks that can do it. But I'm like, I don't want to become an expert at Tailwind. I'm glad that ChatGPT is. And so I can say, we're using Rails 8, we're using Jumpstart Pro, which is like a Rails framework, app in a box that uses Tailwind. And I can say, I'm using Rails 8 with Jumpstart Pro and TurboLinks and Tailwind CSS. How do I center a box? And it says, oh, use these three things. Done. Like, move on with life. I don't have to Google it. I don't have to sit down and like rip through all this documentation because sometimes you don't ask it right. Because if you're unfamiliar with like certain aspects of the framework, you're like, okay, I've never used this thing before. And so I don't even know what to ask. I'm experiencing a problem uploading a file and I'm not getting the bite size back from like the attachment library. And I'm like, I don't even know where to go to figure that out. What's wrong? But with this small context clues, the AI is able to say, oh, here's where it is. And so I think, again, as a startup founder or a small business, take advantage of every tool like that in the world. Because if a big company is like, well, we're not sure about like what happens if we give everybody a chat GPT, it's kind of expensive. And like, oh boy, they're going to take our IP. And you're like, nobody cares about the 3 lines of JavaScript code that you're doing to, click a button that sends a fax. ChatGPT does not care about that. You're giving no useful information to ChatGPT. All you're doing is hobbling your developers so that they can't move fast. And you, as a startup founder, have no such problems because you might be out of business in a week. So send in those 3 lines of code and have it tell you the right thing.
Yeah, totally agree. It's worth the $20 a month or
Mm-hmm.
whatever the pro version of
I have a subscription
ChatGPT
to all
costs.
of them: ChatGPT, Gemini, and I'll paste the same thing in to 3 or 4. And there's tools that do this as well, where you can send it to all of them. Cursor.com I use, and it's really interesting to see the evolution of these tools and how you can just like send it to a couple of them, or you can have it work through some problems much faster than we ever could. And I am now more than ever really thankful for these kinds of things. But to your point about software plus hardware, that's where I think the interesting opportunities lie as well, is interfacing in the real world with your software. Because at some point, I don't know when this will be the case, at some point you'll say, make me a QuickBooks clone, and like the AI will like spit out a Rails app that is QuickBooks. Like that day will come. Not here yet, but that day will come. And so, like, if all you are is a Rails app running somewhere, you better have like some real other competitive advantages. Otherwise, you're going to be competing with every other person who can make an AI that generates a QuickBooks clone. And so, if you have some special touch that you can have as a founder, whether that's in some unfair advantages you have in your network or your ability to interface with people or get on stage, or you have some interface with the real world where you're like, yes, we're a QuickBooks clone, but it also interfaces with your point of sale cash register and then there's more of a competitive moat there. Or you take a iPad and you turn it into a cash register, and now you've got something that is a lot harder to disrupt by somebody just somewhere else in the entire world who can produce a clone as soon as the AI gets good enough. You've got to have that sort of human touch, and if you can, in the real world touch, which is what I really like about what we're doing at Studio Charter, is that you can't replace this with software. To some degree, you can, right? Like we can use AI, but you can see like how it still can't handle my glasses, right? It doesn't blur the background there in a way that a screen actually does. I can wear green, and it won't. You can get a green screen, but if you accidentally forget or whatever, then you can't use it. But I do think that the next 10 to 20 years is going to be in things that are harder to do because they involve the real world, because the AI is just going to at some point get good enough and have seen so many examples of click button send invoice that the marginal cost to produce a feature will round to zero. And so you're going to have some way of differentiating your business, your startup, your product, that's not just we exist or we have another feature that somebody else doesn't have. So I do think that there's an opportunity to find new value propositions that involve like interfacing with the real world. That's my hypothesis. That's why I'm really interested in what we're doing at Studio Charter, because lighting is hard to fake. Like even with AI, and like you can see the math, but like it's going to be a long time till I can press a button on my computer and make it look like it's raining in here, in the sense that you would actually produce a video or a movie or something high quality. Yes, I can press a button, like we've all seen this, the TikTok filters or whatever, but they're not that convincing. It's still a filter, but that level of quality does still involve physical interaction. So I'm incredibly bullish about software plus hardware, software plus real world, in a way that there's also perhaps a timing opportunity here, right? Like there were startups that did Uber before Uber, but there was no iPhone. And so it didn't matter. It was the right time at the right place, and maybe some unethical behavior, but you could have made Uber 10 years before because there was no iPhone.
Yeah.
And, I think when HubSpot and other startups that we really love, well, HubSpot's not a startup, but when they were created, there was no HubSpot that existed. I could make HubSpot today. I mean, obviously it's a lot of work, but like, I'm not trying to say that, but like eventually AI will just make a HubSpot clone in like 5 minutes. That's not the hard part, right? Like that's not the hard part, is writing software anymore.
I'm pretty sure that Darmesh is right now trying to see if he can get an AI to recreate
I'm
HubSpot.
sure. Yeah. He's like, great, I'll disrupt that business. I have enough of it's like, because yeah. I do think there is now more than ever a really great opportunity for more people who are entrepreneurs, who have an interesting point of view and have some unfair advantages, some moats in their history or their background or their network or whatever, to very quickly create something and then try to find a way to make it stickier, because you involve like something in the real world. It's my
Yeah.
hypothesis anyway.
Yeah, that's been my career hypothesis for a while now, is that interacting with the physical world is difficult, and there aren't a lot of people that can do that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that continues to be true. And you can see there's all this talk about AI, but good luck finding an AI that can pick up your laundry or do your
Yeah.
dishes, or, right? It doesn't
Mm-hmm.
happen yet because that's the
It's a
real
hard part.
world. It's hard.
Yeah.
Where do you go to find great talent that is startup compatible? What do you look for? How do you approach the problem of finding someone who's going to come into your startup, very quickly get up to speed and make big contributions in a startup compatible way?
Yeah. So what I think was interesting is that reactive ops, I think maybe I was the only one with a computer science degree. It was more folks that were able to attack problems. We've been talking about systems and premature optimization, all that other kind of stuff, but to be able to break down a big problem into harder problems and tackle things and are very smart, we found much more valuable than whether or not you could write really good code, because that was not the problem that we were solving. Obviously, we were writing code, but like we weren't trying to bend the laws of physics where hiring a super genius that can write assembly code that uses less memory like will matter. Like Facebook, Google scale. I think it was like Fred Brooks that talked about essential complexity and accidental complexity. And when you're faced with a problem, you don't know where the complexity lies and how to cut through that and see the core of the problem you're trying to solve. And I think that's the most important thing in a startup, is having somebody who can look at a problem and be like, oh, here's the way to solve it real quick and easily. Or not that you can always solve it real quick and easy, but trying to be able to like get a sense of the space of the landscape to understand what we're trying to solve, and then how to do it quickly and efficiently without jumping through hoops that you don't actually have to jump through. Because that's the thing that will kill you also as a startup, is saying like, okay, we need SSO, so I'm going to go learn OAuth, I'm going to go learn how to do all this stuff, all these gems or libraries. And you're like, wait, why don't I just buy, Auth0 for like 20 bucks and move on with life? Like being able to sit down at the problem like that and say, what am I trying to solve is authentication, not getting really good at writing my own OAuth code or SSO code. And so that, I think, is what we always looked for, were people who had the ability to do that. Now you might say, well, like how? Like what does that mean? And so we found people who had interests in complex systems. So our VP of engineering was a physicist, because physics is really hard and complicated, and the challenges we're solving are not as intractable as physics, thankfully, but still we're faced with like, this is a hard problem. Like, how do I tackle hard problems where I don't know the answer? Versus being spoon-fed a ticket is somebody who has that interest and aptitude for being able to cut through all the accidental complexity, get to the essential complexity. And so we did look for people who had hobbies or interests or a background in complex systems, whether, like I said, that was physics or electrical engineering, or just people that like to futz with Minecraft plugins, just all that kind of stuff of saying like, I like to play with systems, and I like to try to build things and experiment. The one person we hired built a Minecraft level generator for like Doom and other things, where it would look at the levels and create a Minecraft level out of like a 2D like Doom level, right? Like
Whoa.
Doom like from wherever. And like that was just for fun, right? They weren't a programmer otherwise. And again, maybe this is different if you're hiring a lot of programmers, but I think nowadays with AI and other stuff, it's not obvious to me that someone needs 30 years of Rails experience to be able to move your business forward. But I do think that having that fundamental background or fundamental interest and skills and desires around complex systems are fun, and figuring them out is fun, has always served me and my businesses well, even if that person wasn't a programmer or didn't know Rails or anything else like that, because we're going to be confronted with problems we don't know the answer for, and are hard and are complex every single day. That's why we exist. To the point I think I said earlier, is that every time we encounter a hard problem at work, we're like, this is why we're delivering value for our customers. Nobody's doing this, perhaps because it's a bad business opportunity, and like that's my job to figure out, but it's also no one's doing it because it's hard. Like, how do you take a Mac app and interface with a website and like beam this to that and have the Zoom thing do this? It's a hard problem,
Yeah.
and being able to cut through that and figure out a way to solve it is incredibly important, more than being able to write the code to do it, because it's like once I tell you how to do it, writing the code's easy, but it's I don't know how to do it. Nobody knows how to do it because it has never been done before. That's the whole thing. Again, to the QuickBooks example, QuickBooks exists. If I tell you make QuickBooks, you know what that means. Like double entry bookkeeping, invoices, vendors, customers, whatever. Like there are no unknowns there that you need to solve. It's just a matter of writing the code. But if you say like how to make QuickBooks launch a rocket, I'm just making this up, right? Like I don't know. Right? That's the hard part. The hard part is that I don't know. And at a very early stage company, and I think it would even benefit bigger companies if they had more people that had that aptitude, because I think there's tons of opportunities at big companies as well to say like, I don't like how we're solving this. I think there's other opportunities. But I think at very early stages, you really want somebody who is able to solve problems more than they're able to solve your particular problem, if that makes any sense.
How do you link up with those people? Like, how do you find people with this non-traditional background? You just like post jobs in a bunch of places and just look for the weirdest applications? Or do you talk to everybody, just have a million conversations and be like, okay, I like you're kind of weird. Like, how
Yeah.
did you do that?
There's a process called Sales Safari that our audience may have heard of. But it's like go to where people with this problem are and observe them is a way to do a kind of early stage sales because you just don't know. And so by participating in a plumbing forum, you're going to see all these plumbing problems, and if you can demonstrate your expertise and you can learn some things, you're going to get some customers that way. Same way with hiring is, if you have a hypothesis or an experience where people with non-traditional backgrounds in software development are the kind of people you want, go to those places, whether it's online, it's Slack communities for, DevOps chats, and you see how people interact. And I've hired probably most, like, I can't really say this with a high degree of certainty, but I think I'm fairly certain that I've hired more people through that kind of reach than like putting something on LinkedIn and just waiting for 10,000 undifferentiated resumes to hit my inbox and go, now what?
So you're going to online communities and you're looking and just seeing like, oh, this person is really active and they're very
Mhm.
creative in their approach to
Correct. Yes, like
helping
how they're
people
solving
solve
things, how
problems.
they describe their problem.
What do you say to them? What, like, do you like DM them and like,
Mhm.
hey, I like the cut of your jib. Come work for me. What do you say?
That has worked because you'll see sometimes they'll post, Slack channels, or in the Discords there'll be a hiring channel or whatever, and you'll see them say, "Hey, I'm thinking about taking a new job," and then you're right there, and they know you maybe because you've been interacting or you know them, and you can say, "Hey, I saw you're looking for a job, and I really like X, Y, or Z," and that has an incredibly high hit rate. And it's kind of like buying a house. If the house hits the market, you're too late, right? Because there'll be a bidding war. Like you can't wait for Zillow to have it show up. The best way to get a house is to find the houses that you want and then approach them. And if there's ever a bidding war and you're on the bidding side, you will lose, right? So you want to find ways to get people before they're on the market. And so by participating in there, you absolutely, it can be like, hey, we're hiring for this role. Like, I really like to talk to you about it. And that always works. Like, I've never had anyone be like, nope, right? Like, because everybody wants to talk to the founder of some interesting company that's doing cool things, right? Like, they'll have conversations all day long. If you're not careful, you have too many conversations. Or, stalk them on LinkedIn and or wherever and be like, oh, I'm going to this conference or a meetup in your city. You want to grab a cup of coffee and chat, That works exceptionally well, essentially recruiting. And that
Well,
works very, very
it's
well.
it's even beyond recruiting, right? Because traditional recruiting, I think, is kind of a little bit more passive. I think you're looking for people who
Yep.
have their looking for a job flag turned on LinkedIn and you post same thing. But yeah, this is, I think, an important lesson for
Hmm.
anybody who's running a business is that there are no rules about how you're allowed to do,
Right.
recruiting. And you're totally allowed to see someone who is awesome and say, you are awesome. I would like to offer you a job because I think I'd really enjoy working with you and I
Yeah.
admire your work. People like to be told that, and
It works.
they wanna work for people who tell them that, and,
Yes.
hey, guess what? Like, I know from talking to a bunch of CEOs and working with a bunch of different companies that the average company, they might have a manager schedule a one-on-one with all their employees, maybe 4 times a year if you're lucky, and in those meetings, it's much more likely that you're gonna get the shit sandwich thing from your manager than you're gonna get like,
Hmm.
"Hey, you're awesome. I like working with you."
Yep.
Right? And if you don't know the shit sandwich thing, like it's, "Oh,
Hmm.
you did really good on this project. Boy, you really suck
Here's
at
where you
this
suck.
and you need to improve because everybody hates how you do
Right.
this. But, you've got a great smile." That's the shit sandwich.
Hmm.
And so there are people who would love to have an upgrade in boss, and you can be that upgrade.
It's disappointing and depressing that most managers aren't very good. It doesn't take a lot to stand out. It does take a bit to be much better, but it's also not rocket science. It's not that hard. And I think, again, as a founder, your superpower is you're building a company and you're building a system, and you have the opportunity to say, I'm the founder and blah, blah, blah. Like, let's talk. And people will absolutely have a conversation with you.
The magical easy button trick for managing people is to hire really good people that are a good
Right.
match for what you're doing.
Yes.
That unlocks a lot of stuff. It doesn't matter that they don't know something because you have a
Hmm.
good relationship and they're awesome, and you're gonna buy them that online course or whatever they need to figure that out,
Right.
ChatGPT, whatever. Everything is so much easier when you just have someone who's motivated, interested, and they feel like you're treating them with respect. That makes management much easier.
Hmm. Absolutely. And There are so many, again, micro decisions that every person makes in how they do their job, how they show up for work, when and where they're thinking about the problems that they're working on, that being an actual human to the other person that you're working with is apparently in rare supply nowadays. And especially if you're remote, it's very hard to do. You might not see somebody for days and days, and just in Slack and checking in on them and understanding what is important to them and what's going on in their life and really caring about them is important. I am a big believer in the Netflix philosophy, like we're a sports team, not a family. But that doesn't mean that you're the prototypical, stereotypical, throwing chair, coach at them. You can still be interested and authentically care about them while also holding everyone to a high standard. And I think those two things are not at odds. And if you can do that right, you can have a very high performing, very small team without needing to pay $1 million a year that the Googles and the Fangs or whatever the acronym of all these AI startups are now. Like you're never going to be able to
Magnificent
pay them,
Seven or whatever it is.
right?
Yeah.
Like if you're getting into talks or bidding wars, you will always lose. You can't afford it. But what you can offer is, I think, so much more, which is a great work environment, working with great people, enjoying what you do, making a difference in their lives. And that's, I think, another reason to have folks talk with your customers as often as you can, because at big companies, it's really easy to be like, I don't even know who our customer is anymore, right? Like, I don't know who they are. You get disconnected from it and it becomes very transactional versus like being able to talk with them or solve a bug and push it and have them go, oh my gosh, awesome, like put a little heart on the Slack emoji or whatever. Like that is so, it makes you feel good, even if it's just like fixing a typo somewhere. Like it's really nice to have those interactions, and they're free, that
Hmm.
you can offer that as a small startup. Nobody at these larger companies is going to have that opportunity. Very few people at those companies are going to have an opportunity to do that because of just the nature of the org. And there's no law, as you said, there's no law of physics where like you can't talk to your customers. If
Yeah.
Google or if a big company wanted to, they could do it. They just are choosing not to for whatever reason. And I think
Yeah.
that is
Some big
unfortunate.
companies do talk to their customers, and they do prioritize that. But it's kind of a cool superpower at a startup that, and this goes to leadership too, is that you can trace some employee did X and some customer was impacted
Mm-hmm,
this way. And you can bring that back to the employee and said, hey, you did a really good job there. Customer Y is so happy with the
mm-hmm,
work you've done. You've made a big impact for them. You've made a big impact to the business. I'm glad you're here.
mm-hmm.
And then on the other side of that, we are talking earlier about respecting the people who work for you. And I think at a startup, if you no longer do respect someone that works for you, then it's time to take action on that as well, and not be like a big company there, because you're not operating as a startup anymore. If somebody's not pulling their weight or whatever, and you've had the conversations with them, but you no longer can respect them, then that's breaking down what I feel is a good startup culture. And you need to address that somehow, whether that's letting that person go or intervening in some more involved way or whatever. But I just wanted to throw that out there, that respect part, like we were talking about earlier, giving the negative feedback, but also showing them respect and enjoying working with them. When that starts to break down, you really have to do something at a startup, because at a small company, everybody's going to be very aware of this sort of tension, right?
There have been studies that have shown that in accidents or other things, just saying like I'm sorry leads to reduced lawsuits. And one thing that happens at big companies is, in addition to becoming risk averse, like they can never let people go, or they have these big onerous dehumanizing processes where they're like, I'm going to put you on a performance improvement plan that we both know you're not going to meet because it's been designed to, take 3 months so that our attorneys say we won't get sued, or if we do get sued, we have defensibility, versus a company like Netflix, which has a well-known philosophy of giving managers, giving anybody in the business extreme autonomy, but saying like, yeah, if it's time to go, we're going to cut you a check for 3 to 6 months of your salary, hundreds of that, like just a phenomenal amount of money, and then they can let you go right away because, well, you're not going to sue them if they just cut you a check for $500,000, right? Like you're like, yes, it's fine, I'll go find another job. And so to bring it back to the smaller company, you can't write that check. But what you can do is have authentic experiences with your people and apologize, or have those human interactions, And I have often found that founders are like, well, oh, it's so hard to hire people. And, I can't let this person go because, who am I going to find to write this Rails code? It's like, well, if you are practicing this sort of like continuous recruiting approach, just like we have continuous integration, continuous experimentation, like continuous recruiting approach, it's like not so bad, right? Again, I'm not trying to make it sound like a dehumanizing process, but every person that we've had to let go our companies has just been miserable because it's not working out. Like they all know, we all know it, and they go find a job somewhere else and they feel so much better that it's like a better fit for them and their skills or whatever it is that they need. And so we're not doing anyone any favors by keeping them on longer
Also,
than we have to.
I should point out that almost certainly everybody on the team, everybody in the company knows that this person is not
Mm-hmm.
doing a great job. They're not succeeding there. And all those people probably feel pretty bad about that
And as the
because
manager, you are the last person to know that they
that's
are.
right.
Yeah.
That's right. Often, I think anecdotally, as someone who's kind of been struggling, like, I might need to fire this person. I might need, and then they finally do it. And like often when they announce it to the team, they're like, oh, we're kind of wondering when that was going to happen. And they're like, wait, what? How come nobody told me? Well, it's because you're the CEO. And yeah,
Mm-hmm.
nobody wanted to have that tough conversation with you because that's a tough conversation. But yeah, it sucks, right? Because somebody's living is at stake,
Mm-hmm.
but really e- nobody is benefiting from being in this like not succeeding thing. Of course, you should try intervening, having crucial
Mm-hmm.
conversations, training opportunities. But at some point, if somebody's not able to do the job they need to do, then unfortunately, it's time to cut losses on both sides.
Mm-hmm.
And you're allowed to help these people find other
Mm-hmm.
opportunities, right? You can help them with that. Once you've let them go, you can try to find a better fit for them.
Mm-hmm. Absent egregious examples of somebody, setting your website on fire or something, almost nobody gets let go because they're just a bad person. It's just always like it just either we made a mistake in hiring or something changed or it just wasn't a good fit or the business moved in a different direction, especially at the early stages. Because where we are today might be so different than 6 months from now, and somebody who is a great fit today might not be a great fit 6 months from now, and that's just how it is because the business changes so rapidly.
Or the
Universal.
person they may not like the startup experience. Maybe they thought
Yeah,
they would, but maybe it's too much for them, or
it's just not a good fit.
they want more structure, or whatever it
Mhm.
is.
One thing I like to say when I manage people or they manage people, we manage your managers and other stuff. If the person who gets let go or who gets fired, it's a surprise in any way, that's a failure on your part as a manager to communicate. You should be setting clear expectations, and then it should be super clear when the expectations are not being met in a way that will cause the person to need to be fired. And so it's kind of like, well, if people are watching this contemporaneously, it's like there's been a lot of air crashes sort of recently, but it's sort of like if the plane is headed towards the mountain, your job as a manager is to be like, by the way, at some point you're going to hit the mountain. Not yet. It's not an emergency, but like, I can draw a line and I can say eventually you're going to hit it. And so at some point you have to pull up and then do with that what you will as an employee. Like, it's not my job to fix that. You can ask me for help, but like, I can't fix you or the problem. I can just say, I see a problem. Like, I would like you to figure out how to solve it. And at some point, again, in an airplane, the airplane literally does that. There's a terrain database that has mountains and other things, and it draws a line and says, okay, like, yeah, you might hit the mountain, but like, I'm not going to tell you to do anything. And at some point, it will increasingly issue more and more dire warnings. And then eventually it will pull the airplane actually up for you. And so that's your job as a manager, is to be they call it ground proximity warning system, GPWS, is to be that GPWS to be able to tell the person they're about to hit the mountain. And then at some point, the mountain is getting fired. You have to say like, yeah, you have 30 days or whatever to fix this. And if you don't like that, it is what it is. And I think where a lot of companies and managers also fail is they propose the solution, which never feels good to anybody, right? It's that, again, the ticket taking mentality of being told what to do. Nobody likes, I mean, some people like it and, great, but nobody wants to be told you're failing. And here's, here's how to solve it, because you've taken my agency away and my creativity away, because I might be like, well, the reason why I'm not able to do this is blah, 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 blah. And you don't maybe know that as a manager or founder or whatever. And so the more you can say, hey, like, I think you're going to hit this mountain. Like, what should we do? Like, like, what can you commit to? And I can decide if that works for me or not. And I think that's where it's more humane because I'm saying like, I'm giving you the agency. I'm saying like, here's what I need to see from you. I don't, I'm not going to propose a solution because that's not my job. My job is to help you. Like, if you want to help me work through that, that's fine. You want to think about it, like whatever. But like, and I think that too few managers do that, either because it's corporate risk management where they don't want to give the managers that ability. So they say, here's the process, here's the big thick book that tells you how to run a pip, which is demoralizing and dehumanizing for everyone. And so I think that the more you can have that, the more success you'll have. And then the cool thing is that sometimes people on either side are like, well, like once somebody thinks they might need to be fired or they might need to fire me, like the relationship is over. Like in my experience, having people pull up like increases my trust in them because they have shown that if I come to them with a problem, they're going to solve it. And so like I feel better about it and vice versa, right? Like the person who's on the receiving end, which I've been on the receiving end of that feedback, like we all have, is that like I trust that you're able to like tell me the hard things and give me the room and the space to solve it versus like coming to me one day and saying, hey, you're fired because your pull requests suck. It's like, well, where were you 6 months ago? Like, I've been writing pull
Right.
requests like this the whole time. Like, well, that's not fair, right? Like, so
Yeah.
the more communication, open and honest communication you can have, especially as a founder, because you carry so much weight with that title or co-founder or whatever, it goes so far at creating great organizations.
You don't want to be in the business of prescribing the day-to-day activities of your
Sure.
individual contributors under you.
Mhm.
You want them to be in the habit of like, okay, oh, there's a mountain on the horizon. Well, what do I do about that? Well, this is my strategy for dealing with mountains. That's what I've
Mhm.
chosen to do. And okay, we didn't hit the mountain. Great.
Yep.
Whereas if you're like, oh, you always have to pull up, then they're gonna be like, okay, well, this is the checklist for mountains. Okay, now I'm approaching an airport, and oh, it says traffic, traffic. Oh, there are other planes here. There's hazardous area.
Mhm.
Well, I don't know what
Yep.
to do about that. I would go to my manager to see how
Correct.
I handle the next one-on-one. I'll ask him, okay, so hypothetically, when a plane's about to hit my plane, what should I do? Right? You kind of want them
Mhm.
to have the autonomy, so they're not always coming to
Yep.
you. They kind of have some general principles they can work off of, like don't hit things.
Absolutely. And the worst thing a manager or someone with supervisory capabilities, whether it could be a team lead or manager or CEO, is to say, well, that's not how I would have done it. Right? No, you should never say that as a manager. That is completely irrelevant. Did they accomplish the goals within whatever our system was? Like,
Yeah,
because we've all had that manager who's like, oh, I would have used a different font here, and you're like, so what? You should never say that. Like, is that irrelevant?
yeah,
No. Then keep your mouth shut as a manager. Like, your job is to present the problems or whatever it is, like within the hierarchy. You have a positional authority, obviously, as a manager, and you need to be judicious in using that. And just because somebody had a slightly different style, I mean, like you should be using linters and other things. Like I've worked at places where like some human is like looking at style and you're like, no, like we have automation for this. But, things that you can't automate, things that are a matter of subjectivity, unless it is totally broken or completely embarrassing or going to cost you a certain amount of money if it fails, it is not your responsibility as a manager to point that out or it's not valuable. Like I've worked at places where that was the culture and I've just not found it super valuable. There's a great book on my bookshelf. You probably have the Netflix, and you can see back there, you probably have the Netflix book where they just talk about like you have a sphere of autonomy within your sphere contract, so to speak, that you have with the organization is your manager is not going to come in and mess with that. Now, everyone from an IC up to the CEO has a budget of autonomy, right? Which is to say, like, if I make a mistake, how much money is this going to cost or something? There's a cost for that mistake. And as long as it's within that, like, go do it, right? And I think that is the superpower again as a small company is to say, like, you need to make mistakes because we just don't know how to solve this. If we expect perfection all of the time, we're never going to get anything done, right? It's the same thing to bring it back to air travel. If you never miss a flight, you're probably leaving too early, And so, like, every now and then, it's like probably you ought to miss a flight, right? Because, like, otherwise you're just wasting your time. If you're there like 4 hours ahead of time and you never miss a
yeah.
flight, like, well, yeah, like there's an opportunity cost here that you're not calculating, or maybe the opportunity cost isn't that big, but at companies, it's kind of the same thing. It's like if we never make a mistake, then we're not taking enough risks. And so I want to be able to give to everyone that works with me at my organization, like they need to know what their risk budget is, or their to be able to say like, I'm going to spend a week trying a new auth method, and it might not work. Great. A week is fine. 6 months is not, right? And so like my job as a manager, as a leader, is to help everybody, give them the right context to be able to make all of those micro decisions they could make on a continual basis, to be able to say like, what do I need to know in order to be able to make the right decision? I don't want to have a manager tell me what the answer is, and I don't want to tell you what the answer is, because you're better at this than me. At some point, ideally, like, you will exist and you'll be better than me. And so, like, yeah, I want to help give you the context. And sometimes I have the context, sometimes the customer has it, sometimes it's somebody else. And so, like, you need to be able to have all of the context in order to be able to make the best decision possible, because you are the one doing the work. You're the one making the thing, doing the, solving the customer ticket, building the software, sending the invoice, whatever it is. And so, my job is to make sure you have access to the appropriate context if I can't give you that context, because often I don't have it. And so that, I think, is often lacking as the companies grow larger. Is it's not clear what the context is. It's not clear who holds it. It's not clear how I would get it. And so, we've all had those experiences where they're like, okay, I want to, a big company. I remember I was at a big company. We had been acquired by a large publicly traded company. We were a startup, and we wanted to redo our like UI, because we were like a sub product. We weren't like rolled into the main product, and we wanted to redo a web editor, right? And some senior director or VP somewhere is like, oh, well, no, you need to go talk to this team because they're building a common editor.
Oh
So you go
no.
talk, yeah, and you're like, okay. So I, as the senior director managing all the teams, I was like, okay, like, when can we do that? They're like, well, I think there's space for the product manager to talk to you in like 3 or 4 weeks.
What?
And then so it's okay if I talk in 3 or 4 weeks. Uh, and then we had the meeting, and they're like, well, none of this is documented yet. We kind of consider it beta. We're still working on this. We're going to probably change the API. So you really shouldn't work on it. The API, I think, will be solid. And then the documentation will come out in probably like Q3 of next year. And we're like, wait a second. So it's going to be a year, which is fine. Like, it's not, whatever. Like, you're making software. It's hard, I guess. It's going to be a year until we can get a solid API that is documented to be able to use your editor. So we just built it ourselves, and it was 3 or 4 days, right? In big companies, you feel like you should have economies of scale, and you end up with diseconomies of scale, where it's like, well, if we make one editor to rule them all, then every team can use it and nobody has to worry about it. And you're like, sure, but like, is it that big of a deal that our bold button looks different than your bold button because you just did different font library? It's both open source font libraries. Who cares, right? Like, well, they cared. And so, but anyway, we rolled it out, and, it took 6 months until somebody figured out that we had done that. And they're like, take it off, and use our other one, and it's just like, all right. But again, as a small company, you have the ability to move so fast if you can build the right muscle memory in your staff to give them the right context or access to the right context, so that they can move as quickly as possible without needing to ask permission, because they know where the guardrails are. Everybody wants to know, everybody wants guardrails, right? Like, nobody wants to be like, well, can I buy this book on Amazon or not? Right? You're like, well, I don't know. Tell me about it. Right? And it's like a $20, or can I like sign up for Chat GPT or not? And you're like, I don't know. Let me just like sit down and think about it. If you can say, here's your budget conceptually, it doesn't have to be money, because that's the amount of risk we're willing to take as a business. Like, have at it. Too many companies don't do that.
My take is that, like, as a leader, you have to provide your team with your expectations, your kind of work standard.
Mm-hmm.
This is the stuff I want from you. Do this stuff. I expect everybody here to talk with their colleagues on a daily basis and
Mm-hmm.
just make sure you're aware of what they're working on, or whatever. I expect everybody to have their code reviewed by a peer and, being checked off, like, whatever the standards are. Like, you should make that very clear, and
Mm-hmm.
those are kind of the boundaries that you work within. I want my engineers to build tools where it makes sense to build tools, right? To make the future work easier. Do that.
Mm-hmm.
I expect that. Whatever it is, I want you to document what you're working on very clearly. I want you to send me make that clear to everybody who has that role, what their work standards are, and then, yeah, give them lots of freedom otherwise to work within those guidelines. And sometimes they'll discover, oh, I missed some sort of like work standard that should be made clear to everybody, and you make a correction. Yeah, I think that, along with the context of what you're trying to solve, who you're helping, how they're being helped, what they're facing, all these things I think are necessary in a startup to really get serious amounts of work done
Hmm.
and to be creative, right? Because usually in startups, what you're trying to do is something that's fairly innovative. Maybe you're not making robots or something like that, but you're doing something that has some level of innovation. Sometimes, like, oh, the innovation is we have a good user experience or a good
Hmm.
design. Sometimes that's it. Sometimes it's really hard, like you're integrating weird hardware. Like, I have these lights that can be programmed, but the interface is designed for Microsoft DOS.
Hmm.
Oh,
Yeah.
uh-oh. Right. Those are all real challenges. And to solve those, people do need some level of autonomy because there's no way you can tell them how to solve these problems. And I think on that note, we better
Yeah.
kind of start to wrap it up because
Yeah. Good to
uh,
talk with you again.
is there anything else you want to plug before we sign off here?
MicroConf is great. Everyone should attend that. And also Tiny Seed. Tiny Seed is a phenomenal thing. As a disclaimer, I'm an investor. I think you're an investor as well. But Tiny Seed is a really great kind of like accelerator ish. Is that how we describe it? Like an
Yeah,
accelerator
it's an
for
accelerator.
ambitious startups, but not ones that want to have the typical VC odds of success where 100 startups enter the VC arena and one of them turns into a unicorn, nine of them get some money back, and the rest all fail. As a founder, as an entrepreneur, having sold some companies, I can tell you that those are not great odds versus being able to build a company and get it going and then have the ownership and the control of it, which you lose when you start to take tons of money. The Tiny Seed do not have that ownership, or they don't take the control away from you. And then when you have an exit that an Uber would look at and go like, well, we've raised more than 10 times that or 100 times that, but you as a small startup founder that has not given away a ton of equity to venture capitalists, like that is meaningful. That's a life-changing amount of money. It doesn't have to be hundreds of millions of dollars to have an exit where you are set and fulfilled. I can also say, as a startup founder, be careful what money you take, because if you are enjoying what you're doing and you are solving real problems, you're going to fall in love with that feeling that you get by waking up every day and enjoying where you're going. And if you've got a VC or multiple people on your board that you're stressed out about once a month or once a quarter when you have that meeting, that is a real hit to your psyche in a way that is hard to appreciate from folks when they think about where to go in their startup, who to raise money from. It's not just money. If it was just that easy, sure, but it comes with strings. And a place like Tiny Seed, you're not going to raise hundreds of million dollars from Tiny Seed, but it's just different experience, different probability of success. And I think fundamentally speaking, is likely to produce much more happier, wealthier founders than the VC route. The VC route certainly has value. I'm not saying it should not exist, but I do think that the micro investment kind of approach that Tiny Seed takes is really valuable.
Well said.